This was definitely a big one as far as major wreckages go. So the biggest question really was, how could this have gone unnoticed for so long? Wasn't anyone looking for it? Philip struggled to get up on the mountain and realized that this had to be here for decades. He had to know what this plane was hiding inside and how it even got here in the first place. When he finally did, he realized he should have just left it alone. Philip struggled with the decision if he should enter all by himself or not. He couldn't see a safe way inside the plane. If he would get hurt, no one would notice that he was gone. The temperatures were dropping fast, and Philip couldn't feel his hands anymore from the cold. He had to get help. This was too big for Philip to research on his own. So he signaled two of his colleagues with a flare gun, and they flew over by helicopter immediately. No one had ever seen anything like this before, and together they decided to try and get inside the plane. But no one was prepared for what they were about to see. Philip was the first person who stepped inside the plane. His mouth fell open instantly. How is it possible that no one knew about this? Philip and his colleagues look at each other in disbelief. This will make them famous. The answer would soon be revealed. But this reminded Philip of when he received an anonymous cryptic letter at home a couple of days ago. Without notice, he was called to the research station before discovering the plane. Was this connected somehow? An unknown country, he had left behind all his friends and family for this mysterious project and traveled to an unknown country. Someone from the town had sent him that letter for a reason. He was the chosen one, as he would describe it, and he was determined to turn over every stone for this project. He arrived at the town a few days after he had received the letter. It was a very old and empty town. He had knocked on almost every door when he saw an old man walking the streets. Philip ran toward the man and asked if he could tell him something about the urban legend. The man hesitated, but then said to Philip, "Come to the Old Horse in an hour." Philip agreed without knowing what the Old Horse was. It turned out that the Old Horse was a little cafe in the center of the town. When Philip entered the cafe, he saw the man had already arrived. The man stayed silent for a while, but then he started talking. According to legend, there once was a plane with the number 66 that was supposed to fly to Japan. No one knew who was on the plane or what it was carrying. And as soon as the plane took off, it went off the radar. Some say there was a horrible storm, but scientists debunked that theory. To this day, no one knows what happened to that plane. He wanted to ask more questions, but the man got up and walked out of the cafe. There was only one thing left to do, and Philip wasn't entirely happy about it. The only thing that Philip could do now. He went on his own search. When Philip came home from the airport, he saw a little note attached to his door. Philip opened the note and immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from the same person as the anonymous letter was from. But this time, there was only one sentence. Philip read the sentence 3 times so that he could fully absorb it. Go to the right side of town and walk along the mountain path. Find Theo. Philip wondered who this person was who kept sending him notes and letters. And who was this Theo? As he followed the map and trekked, he saw a little cottage in the distance. That must be Theo, he thought. Then something happens that he didn't expect. But to his surprise, no one was home. He banged on the door as the wind started to pick up. He had to figure out a way to get inside, or he would never be able to continue his search tomorrow. Then something unexpected happens. Then the door cracked open, and Philip stood face to face with a silhouette of a little man. "Theo?" he asked, and the man stepped aside. He didn't say a word to Philip, which was strange. Philip looks to his left and sees something sticking out of another mountain. It doesn't look like something out of nature. He squints his eyes and suddenly recognizes a wing. That must be the plane, Philip thinks. But the plane is at least another day's walk from where he's standing. And there is something else. There is no path leading toward the plane. Philip has to go off-road to reach it, and there is a deep layer of snow. Philip was only halfway there when the sun started to set. He had a little flat spot of ground in sight, where he could set up his tent, but he had to reach it quickly. He woke up the next morning with frozen hands and ice picks in his beard. This was way too big for Philip to do on his own, so he mapped where the plane was and journeyed back to Theo's cabin. There he would call for backup. Philip called 2 of his best friends, who were also researchers, Lincoln and Greg. They had no idea that Philip was all the way in Alaska, but didn't doubt him when he asked them to come too. Lincoln and Greg arrived 3 days later, and they all set up their things in Theo's cabin. Philip led the way toward the plane, and his friends followed him blindly. They were stunned when they saw what Philip was doing there. They spent the first few days taking the plane out of the snow. Somehow the plane was still mainly intact after the crash. The only things that were broken off were one side wing and the back tail of the plane. Philip tried to look inside the plane through the windows, but there was something in front of them. They were taped shut with black tape. There must be something or someone very important inside for them to tape everything shut, Philip thought. But Philip was more interested in something else he saw sticking out of the tail of the plane. It was a little orange device, and he soon realized what he had found. He had found the black box of the plane. This was something very serious because this box held the reason why the plane crashed so many years ago. Philip took the box back to the cabin and screwed it open, only to find something very strange inside. There should be a big memory card of some sort inside the box, but there was nothing. Philip suddenly remembers the anonymous letters he had received. What if this person had taken out the memory card? So they started drilling the next day. It was a bigger job than they anticipated, but they got through the plane's exterior after a while. But the hole wasn't big enough for any of them to crawl through. Eventually, the hole was big enough, and Philip stepped inside the plane. He ripped the tape from the first few windows. The natural light beamed over the inside of the plane, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The plane was filled with crates, but that wasn't the only thing he saw. Something in the corner of the plane glistened in the sunlight. Philip walked toward it and picked it up. It looked like a bullet, but it was all flattened by something. Philip's friends followed him inside and looked around with open mouths. They were too stunned to speak. Philip showed them the bullet, and they decided to check the cockpit together. They opened the door, expecting to see something horrible, but they were met with something they couldn't explain. The cockpit was empty. There were no bodies or other signs that there had been two people in there flying the plane. While Philip stayed in the cockpit to look around, Greg ran back to the cottage and grabbed a crowbar to open the crates. But when he opened the crates, he couldn't believe his eyes. He called for Philip, and he rushed to Greg. Together, they unloaded the crates, but Lincoln was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, they heard a helicopter flying over their heads. Not long after that, Lincoln ran inside and yelled that the police were coming, and it didn't look good. Philip could hear the sirens from afar, and the roars of the snow scooters came closer every minute. Philip tried to think of an explanation. The police arrived within a few minutes, and they surrounded the plane. Philip, Lincoln, and Greg walked out of the plane with their hands up in the air. But Philip was holding something. He was holding the anonymous letters in his hands and wanted the police to see them, but they didn't. They were taken to the police station and questioned one by one. Philip was the last one, and he could finally show the police officers the letters. They were confused as to why he had never called the police, but he explained that he was a researcher and wanted to discover it independently. He told the police that the crates were filled with bars of gold and the black box was empty. He gave the police all the information he had, and they let him and his friend go. There was one more person that needed to be found, the anonymous tipper. The police promised Philip to find this person, but it turned out to be harder than they thought. Philip and his friends flew home, where they wrote all about adventure in a book that ultimately became a bestseller. To date, everyone wonders about this anonymous tipper who was never found, and no one will ever know why they did what they did.